Hello, my name is Eilidh Cage and I am from the University of Stirling. Today I'm going to talk to you about our study called Educating the Educators, the development and evaluation of online training on autism and universal design for university teaching staff. Just to let you know that this talk is pre-recorded as I booked a holiday that clashes with this conference. And no, it's not in the Caribbean, that is Scotland. And yes, you should book a holiday here too. If you have any questions about this research though, one of my collaborators has kindly offered to attend Q&A. So a huge thanks to Shiva Priya Santhanam from Metropolitan State University of Denver. This project was carried out by a large international team of autistic and non-autistic scholars. It included Heather Brown, myself, Dave Caudell, Denise Davidson, Patrick Dwyer, Emine Gurbus, Jesse Harrell, Bella Koffner, Ileana Maggiati, Shiva Priya Santhanam, Stephen Shore, Caitlin Stockwell and Zach Williams. The team was led by Kristen Gillespie Lynch from City University of New York and T.C. Weissman from the University of Calgary. Our overall aim was to test whether online training about autism and strategies for engaging diverse students could improve university staff's understanding and appreciation of both autism and universal design. In case you haven't heard of universal design before, this term refers to the principle of designing spaces and information to be usable by all people. It's about making, in this situation, teaching as accessible as possible for as many different diverse students as possible. Universal design strategies serve to benefit not just autistic students, but all students. So why did we do this research? Well, firstly, we know that more and more autistic people are attending university. For example, in the UK, back in 2014/15, there were over 6,000 recorded autistic students. In 2019/20, this was over 14,000, and this is not including the numbers who decide not to disclose or those who are not yet diagnosed. We also know from research with autistic students that they frequently say that poor understanding of autism and how to effectively teach autistic students is a barrier at university for their positive experiences. This suggests that training staff to better understand and support autistic students could be beneficial. And we also wanted to test online training, as this is something that could be rolled out fairly easily and cheaply for universities. By teaching staff about universal design as well as autism, we also hope this would benefit more than just autistic students and give people realistic strategies that they could apply to their teaching practices. So what was involved in our study? Well, first of all, we had a pre-test where participants completed a survey which included questions about their personal demographics, their past experiences with autistic students and universal design, and then some pre-existing questionnaire measures, including social dominance orientation. And this is a personality trait related to how much someone supports social hierarchies and sees their group as superior to other groups. People high in these social dominance traits tend to be less open and accepting of people who are different. We also measured autism stigma and autism knowledge, so we had a baseline score of these before the training. So after this, participants completed the training. Now, this training was initially developed by 5 autistic students from City University of New York and aimed to originally improve other students' understanding of autism. So our team of autistic and non-autistic academics adapted this training specifically for university staff and expanded the training to include information on using universal design to help all students learn. Therefore, there were 2 modules to our training. One was all about autism and the second was all about universal design. Altogether, the training took between 60 to 90 minutes to complete, and you can actually access and view our training in full if you go to bit.ly/aut-ud training. Finally, after training had happened, participants repeated some of the same questions from the pre-test survey so we could see how things like knowledge and attitudes had changed. Then, 1 month later, we also contacted our participants again and asked them to repeat the same questions. So doing this allowed us to see whether any changes to things like knowledge and attitudes were maintained over time. So who completed the study? Well, we had 98 people who signed up and completed the pre-test questionnaire. We then had 91 people who went on to complete the first post-test questionnaire after doing our training. And then later, 84 people completed the maintenance survey 1 month later. Most of the participants were from the USA, around 75% of the sample, but we also had participants from the UK, Canada, Singapore and Japan. The majority of our sample was female, around 64 people, with a mean age of 42. We also had a range of different academic disciplines represented. For example, we had 38 people in science, technology, engineering or maths disciplines, 24 people from disciplines related to helping professions, and 25 people in liberal arts, so that's things like history and English literature. In terms of prior experience, well, 40 people said they had prior autism training, and 35 said they had actually had training about universal design before. I'm now going to cover some of our key findings. Our data were analysed using hierarchical Bayesian generalised linear models with the data analysis led by Zach Williams. Now, the most important question really is whether the training works. So if we look at autism knowledge, we saw that after training, autism knowledge substantially improved. When we followed participants up 1 month later, there was still this improvement in knowledge compared to baseline. So it seems that the training does seem to improve autism knowledge. What about stigma towards autism? Again, we found that after training, we saw a substantial reduction in stigma. Again, this was still the case at 1 month follow-up, showing that our training also helped staff to have more positive attitudes towards autism. We also measured people's attitudes towards universal design itself. We found here that attitudes towards universal design did become moderately more positive after training and 1 month later. So our participants were also generally more positive towards using universal design within their teaching. It's worth noting a few other findings in terms of relationships between some of the variables. First, perhaps unsurprisingly, if participants had had prior training, this strongly predicted lower autism stigma at baseline. Second, we found that the personality trait of high social dominance orientation strongly predicted more autism stigma. Lower pre-existing knowledge also predicted more stigma. These findings support previous research which shows that pre-existing individual characteristics and knowledge are important variables within understanding stigmatizing attitudes. Third, interestingly, we did not find that type of academic discipline had any effect on stigma. We predicted that perhaps disciplines related to helping professions might have more positive attitudes, but actually we found no relationships between discipline and stigma. Finally, we replicated a finding that has come up elsewhere, that male gender was strongly associated with increased autism stigma. It's worth noting we did have a relatively small sample of males, but this finding does tend to come up in lots of different studies. Let's consider a few limitations and future directions for this research. One thing you might have already noticed is that we have quite a biased sample in many different ways. We had some open qualitative questions, and it was clear that many people decided to take part in the study because they were already interested in learning more about neurodiversity. We really need to target people who have no idea about neurodiversity and maybe are slightly less willing to change. Another limitation was that a large proportion of our participants already had some pre-existing training about either autism or universal design. So again, what we need to know more about is people who have never had training in any of these areas. In terms of where we go from here, what we need to understand is whether after doing this training, people actually change their practices and positive changes actually happen in class. We actually collected a load of qualitative data from our participants, which we're still analysing, but we did ask people to share what they had or had not done to change their practices in our 1 month follow-up survey. So we'll hopefully have some information on what people actually did after training. Finally, and importantly, we need to also see whether autistic students themselves feel the benefits of better trained staff. And I think we need to engage in a constant dialogue with autistic students to make sure that they are having positive experiences at university. So in terms of what we can take away from this research, well, firstly, our findings show that our training shows promising positive results and does appear to be somewhat effective in improving attitudes and knowledge, both of autism and universal design. Second, this is a super low cost, easy to use online training course that could be easily delivered elsewhere. Our resource is open access and anyone is free to use it. What I would love to see is staff having to do these modules alongside the compulsory modules we already have to do at the moment about things like health and safety and GDPR. But for this to happen, what we really need is buy-in from the top, for universities to be fully committed to wanting to roll out training like this. As I noted, we were preaching to the converted a little bit with our training, and for us to reach the people who really need this training, we need our universities to support us to do this. And essentially, although there are some really promising findings here, we still have a long way to go and more to do before we see all staff trained. Thank you very much for listening, and thanks to Shiva for supporting the Q&A and to all the project team and our participants. This research was financially supported by the College of Staten Island, City University of New York. If you have any more questions, please do get in touch with me via email. That's eilidh.cage@stir.ac.uk. And finally, please do check out and feel free to use our training, which you can find at bit.ly/autUD training. And do reach out to us if you want to talk more about doing research with this training. Thank you for your time.